Good afternoon from Dayton, Ohio. Good morning to you all in Los Angeles. I am Cecilia Moore, and I teach here in the Religious Studies Department. I am assisted today by one of our graduate students at the University of Dayton. Her name is Jaya, and I'm very happy that she's here because I know this is my first time ever teaching in the virtual classroom, so deeply appreciative of her. I also think it's important to recognize that this is a joint venture, this course, Catholics in the Civil Rights Movement. It's a joint venture between the University of Dayton and Loyola Marymount University, your Center for Religion and Spirituality, and our Department of Religious Studies. This is also part of a year-long recognition that the Catholic bishops of the United States have called for. Beginning last February, a group of people from around the country, we started to work with the Office of Cultural Diversity of the United States Catholic Bishops' Conference to prepare a year of education for people who want to learn about Catholics in the Civil Rights Movement. And of course, this is the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma, and that was the civil rights demonstration where we would see the most distinguished, I would say, Catholic presence and participation. And I say distinguished because all along there were many Catholics who were involved in the movement, both lay people and religious, but they were not highly visible. Hopefully you all have seen the film Sisters of Selma. If you haven't seen it yet, you'll see it before we meet again on February 28th. And you'll see the importance of Catholic women religious as a real distinguishing representation of the Catholic Church and its support of civil rights. So that is the context for this program. Today, I've been asked to work with you on 2 Saturdays. Today is to give some historical background and context for Catholics and their involvement in the civil rights movement. And then on the last Saturday of this month, students that are in my U.S. Catholic Experience class will be meeting with us to discuss the film, Sisters of Selma. And we're really looking forward to having an intergenerational experience of intergenerational and also, I would say, inter-regional, seeing how people out on the West Coast see the civil rights movement and how people here in the Midwest see the civil rights movement. So I am pleased to be with you. What I'm going to do first is about a 40-minute presentation lecture on Catholics and their involvement in civil rights, beginning in the latter part of the 19th century and coming up into the 1960s. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and I'm going to set my little cell phone alarm here because I don't have a watch. I'm going to set it for about 40 minutes, and at that time we will see where we are, and I will then give you a break, about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and I hope to have a conversation with you about the article that I made available to you that is about Catholic sisters in their work in civil rights in Danville, Virginia in 1963. So that's the plan for today. While I am setting my alarm here, I would like to know a little bit about you all. So would you tell me who you are, and that would be great if we could start with introductions.
Ready? Yeah.
I'm ready.
My name is Andrew Knox. I'm a parishioner at St. Bridget's Church in Los Angeles. I'm active in the Knights of Peter Claver. I've taught in Catholic schools, and I've been involved in the Black Catholic movement since the late 1960s, early 1970s.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Catherine Nelson. I'm from Our Lady of Victory Catholic Church in Compton, California. I'm involved in lecturing, the choir, Bible studies, but mostly St. Vincent de Paul, which I'm very, very interested in that, and it's very rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Cecilia. I am Delia Johnson, and we have had a couple of exchanges through email. I'm a member of St. Lawrence of Brindisi and a parish rep here with the African American Catholic Center for Evangelization, and very active in my parish.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm a member of St. Lawrence Catholic Church. My name is Corinne Ricasner, and my first 7 years were spent in the South, so I am aware of what was going on there among our church. We moved to California, and it was very easy for me as a child to note things and note differences, and I'm glad to see some progress, and I'm glad I have had the experience with white Catholics and citizens also to know that we can help and teach each other, especially to know that we are all basically the same. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Monica Lewis, and I'm a member of Holy Name of Jesus Catholic Church here in Los Angeles. And I am one of the co-chairs of the African American Cultural Awareness Ministry at Holy Name, which is a ministry that has evolved into retaining and maintaining the African American presence in our church as we're faced with the challenges from the Archdiocese with moving our parish towards a predominantly Spanish-speaking parish, because the surrounding area of our parish, there is a lot more Spanish-speaking influence coming into place, and our parish is one where most of the members commute, so they come from outlying areas of Los Angeles to Holy Name because of the African American spirituality and presence there in worship.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Doris.
Good morning.
My name is Doris Timms. I'm from St. Eugene's Catholic Church. Our church is predominantly African and African American. The Nigerian Igbo community is now with our church. I am currently the chairperson of our parish pastoral council and other ministries. I'm also a parish rep with the African American Catholic Center for Evangelization and the secretary. I'm here to really pass most of this information on when I go back to my parish pastoral council and share this information with them, and to keep them involved in what's going on with the center and our culture as we celebrate Black History Month.
Good morning. My name is Pamela Larson. I'm a convert to Catholicism. I converted in 1996. And I'm a member of St. Elizabeth of Hungary Parish in Altadena, California. I'm also a parish rep for the African American Catholic Center for Evangelization, and I'm the pro-life chairperson for that organization. I'm also the chairperson of our pastoral council at St. Elizabeth, and our church is a very integrated church. Blacks are definitely in the minority, but we have a very visible presence in terms of and I'm also very involved in the choir, and assistant director for the choir and stuff like that. So, and a St. Vincent de Paul person from many, very, very active in St. Vincent de Paul Society as well.
Good morning. My name is Kalia Walker. I am a sophomore at LMU, psychology and women's studies double major and business minor. And yeah.
Okay, great. Is that everybody? I think that's everyone.
Yes, that's everybody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I tried to write down people's names as you were introducing yourselves, so when we get to the second part of the class for today, I will. I hope that I have everyone's name right, so I'll call on you. But if I have it wrong, don't feel bad about correcting me. Okay, let's get started then. We're going to use a PowerPoint, and we're going to make the PowerPoint larger so that you can see it. And as I said, what I want to do first is to give some historical background to this whole question of Catholics in the civil rights movement. So if we go to our first slide, yeah, we want to make it. Okay. I think it's important. We can go to our first slide or go to the next one. Oh, no. That one. That's good. That's it. Okay. Thank you. Okay. This is this first slide is of the meeting of the Colored Catholic Congress of the 19th century. And the founder of that movement, Daniel Rudd. Daniel Rudd was born in Kentucky in 1854, and he was born in the part of Kentucky that is called the Holy Land of Kentucky, and that's because that's where Catholics came and settled. Maryland Catholics came and settled in that part of Kentucky. They would bring with them enslaved Africans who had been in their families for many generations, and these enslaved African Americans were also Catholic, and Daniel Rudd's family was part of that enslaved Catholic population of Kentucky. After the Civil War, he comes to Ohio. The purpose of coming to Ohio was to get an education. There was not much in the way of educational opportunity available to African Americans in Kentucky directly after the war. Ohio was a free state and had colleges actually for African Americans since the middle of the 19th century. So Ohio was a good choice to come if you wanted an education. He got his education here in Ohio, and he became a journalist, and he founded the first Black Catholic newspaper. He called that newspaper the American Catholic Tribune. And among the many things that he wanted to do with that paper was he wanted that paper to be a presence in the Black community to educate African Americans about the Catholic Church, because Daniel Rudd firmly believed that the only place that African Americans could expect justice in American society was in the Catholic Church. That was a very deep commitment of his. Now, historically, what we know is that this was, I think, more of an ideal expectation, dream, hope of Daniel Rudd than a reality, because there was a lot of discrimination within the Catholic Church, too. He would then, after founding the newspaper, he would be the founder of the Colored Catholic Congress. And that is a movement that began in 1889 and lasted until 1894. There were many purposes of the Colored Catholic Congress, but the first purpose was to give African Americans who were Catholic around the country an opportunity to come to know one another. And so we see here this image of a gathering of the Colored Catholic Congress. We see men gathered, African American men who have gathered together from all over the United States, coming as delegates to this Congress to represent the interest of Catholics in their diocese. They wanted to discuss issues of the church in the world. That was very important to them. And they also wanted to show the nation, and particularly the Catholic Church in the United States, that there were Black Catholics, there were colored Catholics as they called themselves then, and that they were proud to be both colored and Catholic. This would also become a national network that would allow Black Catholics to work for things that they felt the African American community in general needed, that the Catholic Church could help to provide in American society. Education, jobs, civil rights. These were all topics of conversation at the Colored Catholic Congresses. I think that it's important to understand them as early leaders in this civil rights movement. And again, I'm not an expert in civil rights history, but what I understand from those who are civil rights experts, it's important to focus on what happens in the 1950s and the 1960s, but it's equally as important to understand that as soon as emancipation is accomplished after the Civil War, African Americans, particularly African Americans in religious institutions, are already working towards addressing the social injustices that they experience because of their race. So the civil rights movement has been going on for a very long time. Next slide, please. This is a picture of Homer Plessy. This case that involved Homer Plessy is very important in civil rights history, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision of 1896. Homer Plessy was a Creole, a Black Creole Catholic, as you can see from the picture. He was a very, very light-skinned Creole Black Catholic, but he definitely identified as a Black Catholic Creole. And he was a member of an organization of colored Creoles in New Orleans, in the city of New Orleans, that was working for civil rights there at the end of the 19th century. He became a plaintiff in the case, the U.S. Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson. And the result of the decision in Plessy versus Ferguson would make constitutional, or would declare constitutional, all sorts of laws that we would consider to be Jim Crow laws, laws that supported the concept of separate but equal. He begins by challenging an 1890 Louisiana statute that required separate accommodations for blacks and whites. He contended, he being Plessy, Homer Plessy, contended that it violated the 13th and the 14th Amendments, but the Supreme Court decided against him and upheld separate but equal accommodations for the races, and that would include everything from restroom facilities, water fountains, schools, all sorts of things, public accommodations. The Supreme Court would say that those laws were protected by the Constitution, and those laws would not be overturned until 1954 with the court case Brown versus Board of Education. I think it's important to understand for us in looking at Catholics and civil rights that one of the first major civil rights cases involved a black Catholic. He is the lead plaintiff in Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay. Thomas Wyatt Turner, some of you might be familiar with him. He is one of my favorite people in U.S. Catholic history. He was born in southern Maryland. Maryland was the home of many black Catholics going back into the 17th century when the English Catholics arrived in the 1630s and established Maryland as a Catholic colony. They brought in the practice of slavery with them, and they also, their slaves, those they enslaved, were also Catholic. So one of our oldest black Catholic populations in the United States is located in southern Maryland, and Thomas Wyatt Turner is a descendant of those Catholics. In 1924, he would organize what many consider to be the organization that succeeds the Colored Catholic Congresses. The last Colored Catholic Congress had been held in 1894. In 1924, Thomas Wyatt Turner, Dr. Thomas Wyatt Turner, helps to establish the Federated Colored Catholics. Most of the members of the Federated Colored Catholics were black, but white people could also be members of the Federated Colored Catholics. They had three main goals. The first was to foster this national conversation in the Catholic Church about racism and how it was practiced in the church, and how it harmed all Catholics. That was the primary reason for being of the Federated Colored Catholics, is to look at the what we call the color bar within the church itself. They also wished to develop methods to make Catholics more conscious of racism in the church, so that, being conscious of it, Catholics as a body could work together to begin to dismantle it. And one of the major projects of the Federated Colored Catholics in the 1920s was to lobby the American bishops to integrate their university. And their university was the Catholic University of America. Catholic University of America was not admitting African American students. And so this is one of the causes that they take up in the 1920s. They also had a publication, and publications are really important in the civil rights movement. Newspapers, journals, ways for African Americans to write about what is going on in their own experience, in their own words. And so we see that that tradition of writing about social injustice. We see that present in the Black Catholic movement for civil rights too, and social justice in the church. Their journal was called the Chronicle. Now, the last major goal of Federated Colored Catholics was to establish and to improve Catholic opportunities for education at every level, from elementary school to high school to college, to improve the opportunities for African Americans who were Catholic to receive Catholic education. Because what was the fact is that even though there are Black Catholics, many of the Catholic schools, even parochial schools, if blacks were members of these parishes, there were many of the parochial schools at this period of time, even though blacks were members of these parishes, that would not admit black children. And very few of the Catholic institutions of higher education at this time were admitting African American students. There would be two priests who would become members of the Federated Colored Catholics. I'm not going to go deep into their story, but will suffice it to say these two priests, Father John Lafarge and Father William Marco, they were both members of the Jesuits. They become members of the Federated Colored Catholics. They offer their assistance to the Federated Colored Catholics. The Black Catholic leaders in the Federated Colored Catholics understand themselves to be working with these priests as equals. But really what begins to happen as we move into the 1930s is that the priests, these two priests, make a move to overtake the Federated Colored Catholics. And they end up taking over this organization that was established by lay Black Catholics, charging that because the Federated Colored Catholics said that leadership had to be held by a lay Black Catholic person, and that because that was one of the principles of the Federated Colored Catholics, Father Lafarge and Father Marco charge Thomas Wyatt Turner as Jim Crowing the organization, not making it possible for whites to be in leadership, and they do take over this organization. The majority of the organization will go with Lafarge and Marco, and they will create what is called the Catholic Interracial Council. You can go to our next slide. This is a picture of Father Lafarge, and this is an image of a group of a Catholic Interracial Council from the 1950s. They will create the Catholic Interracial Council in 1933, and this will become the premier Catholic civil rights organization, and there will be Catholic interracial councils all throughout the country, heavily represented in the Midwest and in the Northeast, but they'll also have branches of the Catholic Interracial Council in the South and also in the West. Father Lafarge will become really seen as the leading Catholic on civil rights from that point on, from the 30s onward. He is going to be the face of Catholic civil rights activism. He did have some progressive ideas, but he also was one who would want to always plead for prudence, gradualism, taking small steps, but always asserting that the Catholic position is that discrimination based on race is immoral. So those are some of the organizations and people. I want to turn now and look at a few examples of from Catholic higher education, I would say, on interracial justice, civil rights. And so let's go to our next slide. This is Mother Grace Damon. She was the president of Manhattanville College in the 1930s and 1940s. Manhattanville College was, at that time, the campus of Manhattanville College was in Harlem. And Manhattanville College served elite Catholic women. Catholic women from elite families. Most of the John F. Kennedy's sisters went to Manhattanville College. That's the kind of people who tended to attend that school. Mother Grace Damon was one of these early Catholic leaders in interracial justice. And she was somebody who was really willing to put put her reputation and the reputation of her institution and her religious order on the line to do more than say that it is wrong to discriminate against people based upon color. She would author a speech called Principles versus Prejudice in 1938, and she would deliver this address in 1938. This address that she delivers in 1938 was related to her decision that she made in concert with other leaders of her community to admit an African American student to Manhattanville College in 1938. And we would see her make the case that Catholic colleges have at their core the responsibility to all students, to open themselves up to all students who are qualified to attend those schools. And especially she felt this was true of Catholic institutions and African American students. And that is why in Principles versus Prejudice, she makes the case for why Manhattanville is integrating in 1938. This document gets cited a lot in histories that are being written about Catholics in the civil rights movement because it was a document, a statement, and an action that Damon used that inspired other Catholic schools to then also begin to open the doors to African American students. So we have the first African American student accepted into Manhattanville in 1938. In a way, she had been led to this by the students who attended Manhattanville College, because 5 years before Manhattanville admits its first black student, students at Manhattanville, and this is a women's college, they had published what they called the Manhattanville Resolutions, and I'm just going to read to you a little bit from the Manhattan Resolution so that you can get a sense of what this particular group of Catholics was thinking about civil rights and race and justice. The document says, the following resolutions were adopted by the students of the College of the Sacred Heart, Manhattanville, New York City, at a meeting of the Catholic Action Forum held May 3rd, 1933. Whereas I am enjoying the privilege of a Catholic higher education, I recognize that I have certain duties and obligations towards my fellow man, among which I must consider my conduct and attitude towards the American Negro. I therefore resolve to carry out and adhere to the following resolutions, and I'm just going to read you the first resolution. To maintain that the Negro is a human being and as a citizen entitled to the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to the essential opportunities of life and the full measure of social justice. I think that, today we might not find that to be such a radical statement, but it was quite a radical statement for these young women to be making in 1933. And as I said, Damon would build on that. And I read some of her letters over the past week, letters that she wrote and the letters that others had written to her. Among the letters that I read were some letters from alumni who were angry with her, angry with Mother Grace, threatened to cut off their support for the school and for her congregation. Others are saying that they're proud that their alma mater is doing this. Mother Grace says in a letter that Mother Grace says in a letter that really the most important thing to consider is justice and the students. And she felt very confident that she had the student support. She had the Manhattanville student support in opening the college up to African American women. So I just think that's a really great story that's a part of this Catholics and the social rights and the civil rights movement. I'm going to hold this up. I don't know if you can see it. It's a document called All Men Are Equal, and it is not gender inclusive language, but it is the language that was being used in that period of time. But it's called All Men Are Equal, A Brief for the Black Man. And again, this is Catholic college students in the 1930s organizing, taking this issue seriously. And, you know, as somebody who teaches at a Catholic university, it is very inspiring to me to know that in the 1930s that there were young Catholic college students who were really concerned about the issue of race and felt that there was something positive that they could do. Okay, we're ready for our next one, our next slide. Okay, this is another great person who is a part of our civil rights story. This is A.P. Turow. I don't know if any of you, I know some of you said you were grew up in the South. I don't know if any of you all are Louisiana people or not, but I know I've been told that a lot of the Los Angeles Black Catholics are Louisiana people who migrated westward. So if you are one of those people, you might know A.P. Turow because if you ever visit Black Catholic New Orleans, you will run across Turow. A.P. Turow is a big hero in New Orleans. He was a Black Catholic leader. He was a very important lawyer. For a time, he was the only Black lawyer in the state of Louisiana. He was a very important member of the NAACP, and he was part of the team. One thing, I don't know if some of you may know this, but in case you don't know it, in order for them to be able to bring the Brown case to the Supreme Court when they do in the early 50s, they had to actually try many cases on the state level, challenge these Jim Crow laws in individual states. So lawyers working working to contest separate but equal legislation, they were very important. Their work was very important to the work that the NAACP is doing all along to ultimately challenge Plessy versus Ferguson. And they will get the opportunity to do that with the Brown case in 1954. But originally it's these local laws that have to be challenged. And A.P. Turow was one of the leaders in bringing cases in Louisiana to the fore that had to do with this separate but equal, challenging the separate but equal. Turow could not get an education in Louisiana. There was no school for him to go to as a Black man in Louisiana, so he had to leave home. He went to Washington, D.C., and he studied law at Howard University. He graduated from Howard in 1925, and as soon as he could, he came back home to New Orleans to practice law. It was his the connections, the friendships that he made and built while he was in Washington with people like Thurgood Marshall and Charles Houston, who was kind of the architect of all of these law cases, that would cause him to become a leader in the NAACP and also to be a part of their strategy of bringing these cases to court. Ultimately, he led the New Orleans NAACP, and he was also the legal advisor to the Knights of Peter Claver. A.P. Tureau would spend decades bringing these cases to court, and a lot of them had to do with the way in which black school teachers in Louisiana were disadvantaged by the separate but equal laws, the Jim Crow laws. So again, all these cases that he will try in Louisiana at that time are going to feed into the set of cases that are going to give Thurgood Marshall and his team what they need to challenge Brown, bring the Brown case, challenge the school board in 1954. That case, Brown versus Board of Education, decided in 1954, that's the case that strikes down 1896's Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that separate but equal was constitutional. Now we see the Supreme Court reverse itself and strike down all of those laws. I think it is very important for our purposes of Catholics in the Civil Rights Movement to know the important role that black Catholics like Homer Plessy and A.P. Tureau play in that really important part of the Civil Rights Movement. What we know is 1954's case, it's important, it's very, very important, but a lot of things don't change right away because of it, and that is going to the fact that we're going to have separate but equal deemed unconstitutional, but we will still see the South, especially the South, but other places too, drill down and resist integration, resist desegregation. That's what's going to make people like Dr. King and all of the other people we're so familiar with in the Civil Rights Movement. That's what's going to those are going to be things that are going to energize them and make them push through the rest of the 1950s and into the 1960s for civil rights. Now, one other little thing about A.P. Tureau, if you would, next slide, thank you. This is a book, it's a really good book. It's called Black, White, and Catholic, New Orleans Interracialism, 1947 to 1956. I put this together with the A.P. Tureau slide and the Mother Grace Damon slide because this is another example. Mother Grace, of course, and her students are there in New York City. But we see a contemporary Catholic civil rights activism happening on Catholic campuses in New Orleans. And A.P. Tureau is one of the people in New Orleans who lends his moral support to these Catholic college students who were studying at Xavier University, which was and still is the only black Catholic college or university in the United States. Students at Xavier, some students at Loyola College in New Orleans, and a lot of young women who were studying at a variety of Catholic women's colleges in New Orleans. We will see these young men and women on these Catholic college campuses organize, begin to work together to challenge the color bar in the Catholic Church. And that is picking up on what we would have seen Federated Colored Catholics be, the Federated Colored Catholics and what they felt needed to be done. Really challenging the institution of the Catholic Church in the ways in which it was acting in a racially, well, more than a racially insensitive way, was practicing racism within the Catholic Church. These young people in the 40s and 50s are challenging that. They do not understand how it is that their church can support segregation within its own institutions, especially when it doesn't have to. So that's just another example for us. We can go to our next slide. Thank you. I want to talk about this couple for a few minutes. This is this is Mr. and Mrs. Earl Johnson, Earl and Janet Johnson. They were a Black Catholic lay couple. They lived in Florida, and in Jacksonville, Florida, precisely. Mr. Johnson was a lawyer. He was a very important, active member of the NAACP, and like A.P. Turow, he would become the head of his local NAACP chapter there in Jacksonville. And he becomes the head because of his work as a lawyer for civil rights in the 40s and the 50s. His wife was an educator. Together, they opened up their home in Florida to civil rights workers. We have stories of King spending time in their home with other civil rights leaders. The Johnson's home was a place where civil rights activism was happening, and he represented many civil rights demonstrators who, when they would go to jail, he would go post their bail. He would represent them in court. He represented and bailed out Dr. King and many civil rights leaders who came through Florida in the period of the 50s and the 60s, working for civil rights. And they are featured, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, along with A.P. Turow. They're featured in an article by Father Cyprian Davis. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Father Cyprian Davis's History of Black Catholics in the United States. In an article that he wrote about 10 years ago, he wrote an article called Black Catholics and the Civil Rights Movement. In this article, Father Davis chronicles the work of people like Earl and Janet Johnson and A.P. Turow, Thomas Wyatt Turner, and other Black Catholics, because that's something that I know something that I'm very interested in, is featuring Black Catholics who were involved in the civil rights movement. And there were important Black Catholic lay people who were involved in this movement. And so I think it's great that we've got articles like Father Cyprian's that make it possible for us to begin learning about these people. Okay. I'm ready for my next slide. This next slide, no images here, but it's just kind of chronicling what are our bishops doing? What are American bishops doing on the issue of race? And before I came downstairs today, I was telling one of my colleagues who was also working today, and I said to him, actually the story of Catholics and civil rights is like one of the happier stories as far as the history of Black Catholics in the United States goes. because we actually you can see a lot of Catholic energy and leadership to address racial injustice from a moral standpoint and from a religious standpoint. And we see some extraordinary bishops at this time. So I have a few of them here. There are many more I did not have time or space to include, but I want to just talk about these few. This Bishop Albert Fletcher from Little Rock, Arkansas, who in 1946 starts desegregating his diocese, and who also requires in the Diocese of Little Rock this curriculum that had been developed, that what was called an elementary Catholic catechism on the morality of segregation and racial discrimination. This was a curriculum to be used in Catholic elementary schools, teaching children why segregation and racial discrimination was wrong. And I just think that's so amazing. It's 1946, and it's part of your Catholic education in Little Rock, Arkansas, that you are being educated about what racism is, what racial prejudice is, and why it is against your faith. It's against your faith, and it's against human rights and civil rights as well. But we see that in the 1940s. The next year we'll see Cardinal Ritter, also a Midwestern leader, and Southern too. It's kind of a Southern Midwestern leader, desegregating his diocese, Archdiocese of St. Louis, desegregating all the parochial schools there, and then that would follow to desegregating other Catholic institutions in St. Louis in the 40s. The next year we have Cardinal O'Boyle in Washington, D.C. In 48, ordering the desegregation of all his schools in Washington. And he will, from 48 onward, he's going to be engaged in this national civil rights movement. So much so that he will give the invocation at the March on Washington. And he also will be one of the chief mourners at Dr. King's funeral in 1968. Can we have our next slide? Thanks. I guess I lost my other bishop slides. Can we go one more and see if it's okay? There it is. Thank you. Okay. Bishop Vincent Waters. This is another one of my favorite people because I've researched Bishop Waters and I've written about him. When he becomes the Bishop of Raleigh, North Carolina, in the late 40s, he begins desegregating his diocese too. Among the things that he was said to have demanded in Raleigh was that whenever he said a mass at the cathedral, he required that he have black and white altar servers. He would not have masses that where the altar was not integrated. He also ordered the desegregation in 1953. And I really like to point this out because this is a southern diocese, and it is the diocese in the United States at that time that had the smallest number of Catholics of any other diocese here. So he was taking a big risk in 1953 to, in the South, in a place where Catholics are in a serious minority, to go against the culture and the law too, because we won't have Plessy versus Ferguson struck down for another year. Brown is decided a year after Vincent Waters desegregates in Raleigh. And it was everything. It was the churches, it was the schools, it was the social service agencies, everything in his diocese. Same year, we'll see further south, Joseph Rummel, Archbishop of New Orleans. He will call for the end of racial segregation in New Orleans. He will stop short of the schools. He won't integrate the schools just yet. That will not begin to happen until 1962. And that is not done easily at all in New Orleans. There's a lot of backlash that he and others face with his decision in New Orleans. But I think his way is softened by what those Catholic college students had been doing at Xavier and Loyola and the women's colleges. They make it possible. I think they help pave the way for what he wants to do formally as bishop. And then we see these three Southern bishops as a body at Lent time in 1961, the Bishop of Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, and Atlanta, Georgia. These bishops together announced their intentions to integrate the parochial schools in those dioceses as soon as possible in 1961. We'll also have a tradition of bishops in the United States. Beginning in the 40s, we'll see them start to publish letters having to do with Catholics will call it many things over the years. They'll call it the race question, they'll call it the color bar, they'll speak of interracial justice, they'll speak of racial justice, they'll speak of racial discrimination, racial harmony, and then ultimately they will use the language of racism. But they will begin in 1943 issuing statements on race. Probably the most important of the early statements was the one that they put out in 1958 called Racial Discrimination and Christian Conscience. They'll follow that up in 1963 around the time of the March on Washington. And remember, their support for the March on Washington by Archbishop, he was Archbishop at that time, he would later become a cardinal, Archbishop O'Boyle of Washington. So we'll see them issue a pastoral, the U.S. bishops issue another pastoral statement called On Racial Harmony. 63 was a particularly hard year. We would see lots of deaths in that year, and probably the most tragic of the deaths would be the girls at the church who were killed, the four little girls who were killed in 1963 at their church, in the church bombing there. They'll follow up in 1968 with a statement called National Race Crisis. And that happens after the assassination of Dr. King, where we see all of the, the rioting that comes with his assassination. And then, more close to our times, we would see their statement on racism in 1979 called Brothers and Sisters to Us. And then the most recent of the documents, and this one would be by the Black bishops of the United States, What We Have Seen and Heard in 1984. And I would just point out, in many dioceses, we would also see bishops on their own, in their own diocese, issue pastoral letters on the question of racism after this period of time. So, and you all may have read some of those, be familiar with them. I have one more slide. I think we need to go back. I just want to point this lady out to you. I don't have a whole lot to say about her, but I figure that some of you have seen the film Selma. And if you have seen the film Selma, you may remember that beautiful young woman who is always there when they're out, you know, she's in the car with them, she's in the room when they're coming up with strategy. We don't get to hear this woman speak until the very end of the film, which was personally quite disappointing to me. But I just wanted to put her into our presentation today because she also was a Black Catholic. And she was a very important member of CORE and SNCC. Diane Nash, she was from Chicago. She had contemplated during her youth, she had thought she would become a sister. She was interested in becoming a religious sister. I think she became a beauty queen, but she was very beautiful. But she also was one of these young Catholic people. She's a young Black Catholic woman who is, you know, paying attention to her society, and she's also paying attention to the messages she's getting from her church. And these are things that inspire her to get involved against, her family. Her family was not happy about her getting involved in the civil rights activism. But it was all of these things from her education. She was educated in Catholic schools. Growing up as a young Black person in the Midwest, seeing the injustices, and also being a very sincere young Catholic and listening to what the church had to say on racial justice. These are the sorts of things that inspired Diane Nash's activism. And I think it's pretty neat that, you know, even though we don't get to hear a lot from her in that film, it's my understanding that a lot of places have been inviting her recently to come and to talk about her experience. So I think she's going to be somebody that we're going to learn a lot more about over the years. People who specialize in civil rights history have known her for a long time, but I think that she's one of these people who was important but was in the background. And again, I think it's good for us to know that she was a Black Catholic civil rights activist. So those are my that's my formal presentation, a historical overview of where Catholics are in this movement. Let's see why don't we take a break for about 10 minutes now and then come back, and I'll see if you have any questions about any of the material I presented, and we can also talk about the article. I hope that you'll want to talk about the article about the sisters in Danville.
Okay. One thing that caught my attention in your article was the fact that the bishop, John Russell, in Danville, in one hand was supportive of civil rights and also supportive of the work of the sisters of that community, but he would not allow them to participate, his priests and sisters, to participate in demonstrations or be on display, if you will.
Right.
I think we still see a lot of that today in different forms among bishops and priests and sisters, and it's been going on a long time. The church needs to be more out front in its civil rights movement than it is.
Okay. Well, I definitely that was something that was a question for me in doing the research on these sisters, because the story, if you've read the article, so you can see the really important things that they do.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But this was not, their actions were not recorded anywhere. And Danville is one of the major cities for the civil rights movement, especially in the early part of the movement.
Yes.
So there's a lot of history on what was happening in the city at that time, but none of the recorded histories brought up these sisters at all.
Right.
And I found out about them because my mother was a friend of these sisters, and then that's how I found out about them. And that when I started researching them, I learned a lot of things about people in religious life at that time. And one of the things that I guess it's true of men in religious life. I suspect it's less true of them, but women in religious life are taught not to hold on to any of these things. That, you do the work, you do it quietly, you don't seek any fame or recognition for what you do. And so a lot of things that people like these sisters did are not part of the historical record. I asked the minister, one of the ministers who was still living in Danville, when I wrote the article, and he actually still lives in Danville, Bishop Campbell, about the sisters, and he said that that they did not want to be out front. They wanted to be there as a support. And so from their perspective, that was the right thing to do. But I also think what happened in Danville regarding, the bishop being supportive of civil rights, being supportive of the sisters and what they were doing, he was getting calls from white Catholics in Danville complaining that the sisters were there with the Negroes out on the streets, and it was embarrassing to the Catholic Church. That is why Mother Teresa gets the phone call saying, no more public demonstrations, but if you want to do things at your convent, go for it. You can do that. But I think that was a big part of their struggle. Is Catholics in the South felt, especially places like Virginia where you don't have a really large Catholic population, they felt that by the priest and the sisters getting out there and saying that they supported civil rights, that it in some way might make their situation as a minority religion that was still somewhat suspect, it would make their situation worse. And that's why, I don't know, have you seen the film yet, Sisters of Selma?
Yes.
Okay, so if you've seen Sisters of Selma, you remember Archbishop Tulin, who is in charge of the diocese there, Mobile, Birmingham. He says to all the religious and the priest in his diocese, which was the whole state of Alabama, essentially, you're not out there doing anything.
Right.
Nothing. And also trying to get the bishops from other places whose people are coming into Selma. He was like pleading with them, keep your people at home.
Right.
Because the Catholics don't want, the Southern Catholics don't need this, to be seen as on the side, publicly supporting something that the majority of the South wasn't ready for. But the other thing I think, and I'm glad, I think your question is really good. What we will see is within months of Bishop Russell, who was the Bishop of Richmond, Virginia, Danville's in the Diocese of Richmond, within months we're going to see him reverse his course on that. And he will support the public activism of Catholic priests and sisters in civil rights. And one of the reasons why I think that happens is we have by that time, the Second Vatican Council is going on, 1962 to 1965. And in the year of 1964, we have the Decree on Ecumenism. And that Decree on Ecumenism gives Catholics more than support for being involved in things like the civil rights movement. Because remember, civil rights movement is very much a movement of the black Protestant churches. All the main leaders are black ministers from Protestant denominations. And so when you get the decree on ecumenism and the Catholic Church is saying to Catholics, you should be working with other Christians and people of good faith of other religions too on issues of peace and justice, then, it's very hard if you've got a Vatican II document saying this is the church's stance on something like this, to then tell your priest and your nuns and your diocese you can't go to Selma. So I think that's another thing I think is so important is the confluence of the civil rights movement and what's going on in the Catholic Church in the 60s with the Second Vatican Council. Lots and lots of opportunities are becoming available for people to work together on all sorts of things, and civil rights is just one of them.
Yeah, the sisters in Danville did work with Protestant churches. Your article mentioned that they did work with the Protestant churches.
Yeah, they did. They were because they came to Danville to evangelize. They came to Danville to evangelize, and the main group of people that there were to evangelize in Danville were African Americans and poor whites. So they had built up a relationship with ministers, Protestant ministers, African American leaders, since they got there in the the late 30s when they get to Danville.
Is this religious community still in existence today? They're not?
No, it isn't. It isn't. They disbanded in the early 70s. They were never a very large community, and when their founder she was quite aged by the time we get to the late 60s, early 70s, and she also had some mental illness, and she was not able to keep the sisters together. I was able to work with with the youngest woman who was a member of that community, and she's referenced in the article. She is the Sister Leona that I talk about in the article. And you see if you read the footnotes, a lot of the information is from interviews I did with her, Sister Leona Card. She fought really hard to keep her sisters together, but it was clear that, she did not have the ability to keep that community together. So she was able to enter the Sisters of St. Francis in Denver, and she enters there in the 70s, and to this day she's a Franciscan sister. But if you were ever to meet Sister Leona Card, she would, still very much identify as a member of the Society of Christ our King. If that community hadn't disbanded, she would have still remained with them, and she would have stayed in Danville. But that wasn't her. She didn't have that choice. She's now probably in her early 90s.
Hi, I have a question. First of all, thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Very insightful. Dr. Moore, you covered a lot about the Catholic bishops being involved in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where we might argue that racism was much more overtly expressed. I'm wondering if, and this may not be the focus of your research, but if you have general knowledge about maybe strategies that were utilized by Catholic bishops as racism became much more covert with the passing of civil rights legislation and things of that nature. So as you go into like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, racist acts become much more kind of cloaked in language or, things like that. Were Catholics very much involved in anti-racism activism in those times?
Well, I think that that is one of the best questions about this whole history. And it really is, your question is related to the reason why I think the Office of Cultural Diversity, the Bishops' Conference Office of Cultural Diversity, wanted to focus this year on the question of Catholics in the civil rights movement, because after, I would say, by the time we make it into the 1970s, and definitely by the time you get into the 80s and the 90s, and I would say sadly today, the Catholic Church as an institution does not have its eye on racial injustice, racism, the way that it did in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. You know, when's the last time you picked up a Catholic journal or newspaper and seen an article, a serious article about racism and the church's obligation to do something about it, to address it? One of the things that I found, because I did this story about, I worked on the story about the sisters. I did this project about 10 years ago, and a little earlier than that, I started investigating Vincent Waters, who was one of the priests, or one of the bishops who I talked about on your in the lecture. And what I found in terms of Vincent Waters, you know, why is it that somebody who is a Southerner, he grew up in Virginia, he acknowledges that he was very racist. He speaks of a racial conversion experience that he has, not here in the United States, but when he is studying abroad in Rome, where he meets a young black man from America who has come over to Rome as a last court of appeal, if you will, because this man has tried all sorts of dioceses and orders to try to pursue his vocation as a priest, and nobody in the United States is willing to take him. And Vincent Waters can't believe it, that this guy has to come to Rome to try to see if there's somebody in Rome who will accept him for ordination. And over the course of, I guess, several months of knowing this young man, who actually is working in the seminary, he's like he works in the kitchen of the seminary. He serves the meal to the seminarians. And Vincent Waters says the first day that when they see this guy, I think he calls him Charlie, when he and the other seminarians see Charlie walk into the dining hall that day, they haven't seen a black person in a long time. And they get up and they applaud because it makes them feel like they're back in America because, you know, hey, here's somebody black waiting on us. And Vincent Waters gets to know this guy, and he writes to his bishop, the Bishop of Richmond, because he's studying for the Diocese of Richmond. And he writes to him and he tells him, you know, there's this really great black guy over here in Rome, and he has a vocation, and I think you should accept him for the Diocese of Richmond. Now, when I first read his account of that, it just sounded so much like a Hallmark card to me. I did not believe it, and so I asked someone who had done a lot of research on the history of the Diocese of Richmond about it, and he showed me where I could verify Vincent Waters' claim that he tried to get this young black man admitted to his diocese. And I was able to find it. So it was a true story. He really did try to do that. And from that point on, Vincent Waters makes it his personal mission that whenever he gets enough power, he's gonna break down discrimination, because he really feels like it's the greatest evil we have. And he speaks of it as a cancer. It's completely invasive and destructive. And so when he becomes a bishop, even though he's made a bishop of a southern diocese, he goes for it from the time he's established, installed as their bishop. He's moving forward on this desegregation. And part of it is a roundabout way of answering your question. I think that one of the reasons why you're going to see a lot of bishops in this period of time making these sorts of, from the top declarations and instituting desegregation programs in their diocese is because they have a high sense of their authority, their personal authority in their diocese to do what they think is right in their diocese. I love collaboration. I mean, I'm a post-Vatican II person. So I like talking, working it out with people. These guys didn't do that. They just made decisions. And, in this case, this is them making decisions that are actually helpful to Black people. I think that as we move into the 70s and 80s, collaboration and consensus becomes more of a model, and in some senses it makes it harder to do things, to get big things like this done. If I have to consult you and we have to talk about it and make decisions, it's harder to get something done. Also, there are other things that the Catholic Church turns its attention to in the decades that you reference. So much so that when we've got Ferguson happening, it was, to me, I thought it was kind of sad, the message that the Archbishop of St. Louis put up on the website. Because essentially what I got from that was him saying, don't destroy property. Don't get involved in that. And then I'm like, is that the same diocese that in 1947 desegregated?
I'd like to speak, if I have.
Okay.
My name is Pam Larson. I'm from Arizona, so I have a different experience, different perspective, and I'm a convert to the Catholic Church. I so appreciate your talk. It was very informative to me, and I love the Catholic Church. And I was raised kind of as a Baptist, kind of, in moments. And then, New Age, Science of Mind, all that stuff. And then I had a very unusual conversion experience to the Catholic faith. So to me, I see God's hand present. I see the Lord present. And I'm so impressed by the church. Now, this is my perspective, coming from a different place, and from the Southwest and moving into California in 1972. I was born in 1947. And, but see, I spent a lot of my time working in juvenile hall with kids, where the majority of them were Black and Hispanic, but lots of Blacks. And we have a disproportionate number of African American young men and men in prison. So I began to look at things a little differently, because to me the crisis in our time in terms of our race is the moral crisis. And to me, I have to look at my own sinfulness and ask God for a conversion of my spirit, because that's where, to me, things change. Where I have, I saw myself in the children, is what I have to say. I began to see my own sneakiness, my own distrust of God, my own distrust of goodness, my own distrust of the triumph of God. And I began to understand why they were making the decisions they were making, because it looked good to them. I believe now that every every crime that people choose to do comes from basically a distrust in God, and a distrust that the right way is going to be a way that's going to work for them. You know? Because when my father's generation, in times when there was a lot of oppression, systematic oppression, the brightest, and still today, some of the brightest guys from our race are in prison. You know, and to me, those little moral issues of being honest and telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and saying what you think is so, even though it's not ultimately so necessarily, but to tell the truth from your perspective, I think is very, very important when it's not popular. So I saw how the girls were, you know, they love those little criminal boys. That's the exciting thing. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, I worked with the girls too, and they were very challenging. But I learned a lot about those sisters, little young sisters. They taught me a lot. And, you know, one of my primary issues is, in terms of the pro-life movement, is that 35% of the women who have abortions are African American, and that how we deal with our sexuality and our relationships with each other, male and female, is seminal and critical. And I think that you know, now, to me, racism is kind of, I studied one time something called internalized racism. It's how we, you know, people feed us the poison. I think it's the devil, that's what I say. Ultimately, it's the devil. The devil feeds us poison, and we believe the poison, and then we act out of it in terms of how we treat each other and how we treat ourselves. So to me, I saw it, you know, in the inner, you know, where these kids came from in the ghetto, and the mentality, and how boys and girls treated each other, and how they disrespected each other, and it was systematic, and how they saw no models. I'm sorry, no models of. I'm sorry, I'm preaching. All right, I'm sorry. She said, "Do I have a question?" I don't have a question.
You don't have a question.
I have a testimony.
Okay. Well, you know, it's good to share your experience.
Yeah.
And your thoughts, because I mean, in the end, it's just good to as Catholics, to be talking about these issues, because we haven't been talking about them for a while. And I guess I just think that what I see and what I was able to bring forward today is, I feel like Black Catholics got the conversation going. They got the conversation and the activism going. And so I think it's probably going to come to us to get the conversation and the activism going today, because obviously there's a lot that needs to be dealt with. So does anybody else want to say something, or?
I have contributions also. One of the things I'd like to see is, the next time I see a group like this, I would like to see, as they use the word, diversity, because we all have more in common than we have different. And we have stressed diversity so much that it's created adversity. Because I have always lived within, in some sort, an integrated community, whether it was the schools, the work, or wherever, I have had the opportunity to interact with, whether they were Catholic or otherwise, whites, Mexican Americans, and others. And as I said, we have a lot more in common. But unless we can share that with each other, people are always stressing the difference. I've had people get shocked that Mr. Obama became our president and the example he has set. And I says, no, most black people are like the president. They're well-spoken, well-educated, and have some of the same feelings. It's just that's been kind of not the thing that most people, whether they're Catholic or otherwise, see of us. And I would like to see much more of that stressed in Los Angeles, which is supposed to be such a diverse community. In fact, Los Angeles started, I don't have a question, it's contribution. Los Angeles started, the little city of Los Angeles started as an integrated community, okay, when it was under the Spanish colonial rule. We have so much to learn about ourselves and our own history that would contribute to getting along better, whether we're Catholic or otherwise, with each other. So I will pass the mic on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I just had a question. In your opinion, what do you in your opinion, what do you believe is the role of Black women now in the fight for social justice, given the history of, you know, Black women in the civil rights movement kind of being seen but not heard, like the example you gave with Diane Nash?
Yeah, I think that the more we dig, because Diane Nash is pretty silent in that film, I don't think that she was silent in the movement. And but I think it's who's telling the history, who's remembering it. And I think it's the responsibility of African American women to be there, to be active, but also to record the history, write the history, and tell the history too. I think it would be very different to pick up a history of the civil rights movement written by an African American woman. And we don't have one of those yet. I think that when we get one of those types of histories, we're going to see more.
I gotta say though that the director of Selma is an African American woman.
Yes,
Ava,
she is.
Yeah, and my
She directed the.
Yeah, and my
Yeah.
ex-husband was a film major from UCLA, so he's very involved with kids becoming filmmakers and stuff, and he knows her very well. And my daughter knows of her, not. Yeah, Ava. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that because I think that's one of the.
Well, and I mean, I love the film. I think that film is probably one of the most beautiful films I've seen in recent years. But it is striking that she's always there, but she doesn't say anything. But we know she was a critical member of that team. And you're not a critical member just because you're always sitting in the car. There's more to it than that. You're doing something.
Hi,
Okay.
good morning. Thank you for your talk again. I'm actually a student at
You're
LMU.
welcome.
And during this past semester, we've dealt with the issue of the killing of unarmed Black men. And this seems like the same type of behavior that occurred during the civil rights movement. And if the Catholic Church is no longer concerned with racial injustice, what do you think the Catholic Church's stance should be on the killing of unarmed Black men and boys? Like, what does that mean? Do they still stand for?
I missed some of what you said. I didn't get to hear.
Okay.
Did you say you were in a class this semester?
Oh, no, I'm just saying. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
It was cutting out a little bit when you were speaking.
No, yeah, I was just saying during the past semester, kind of like as a Black student body, we've been dealing with the issue of the killing of unarmed Black men.
At Loyola, you have.
Yes.
Black students at Loyola have been dealing. Did you do die-ins and silent protests, things like that on campus?
I did not do partake in the die-in.
But were students on the campus doing that?
Yes, there was one.
Students here at the University of Dayton were.
Okay.
And faculty was pretty involved, staff was involved right before Christmas for about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And there was, this I think is important, and this gets to something that the young lady said, asking about the role of Black women. It's not just young Black men who are being harassed and who are dying at the hands of, these police, aggressive policing. It's women too.
Yeah.
There are many instances of women who have been beaten and who have been killed as well. So there was a letter that a group of Catholic theologians wrote and published. It was probably about a week after Thanksgiving. And in the original draft of the letter, it was a letter of Catholic theologians, mostly teaching at colleges and universities, but also at seminaries. They signed on to the letter and called for the Catholic Church and offered themselves as Catholic theologians to be more directly engaged in constructive solutions to why is this happening. And in the first draft, they focused mostly on men. And one of the younger people who read it wrote back and said, what about the women and the children also who are victims of this police violence? And she had a lot of statistics showing that it's not just men, and that got added into the letter. And then there were others who said, well, it's actually not just African Americans, it's also Latinos who are facing the same sort of thing. And so that got added in. And then, you know, we've recently had just this in the past few days down in North Carolina, the 3 Muslim students who are now dead, reputedly because this guy said that he was, you know, that they were fighting over a parking space. And so it's Black Lives Matter now, Brown Lives Matter, Muslim Lives Matter. It's a lot of us in our society who are experiencing this. It's, you know, and that's why I think is kind of what's different 50 years later. When we're looking at this question of racism and the problems that we face, it's not just black and white anymore. We're more diverse now, and so it's lots of groups of colored peoples who are experiencing this violence and oppression. And it is surprising, given everything that has gone for that has happened in the 50 years before, that we still find ourselves experiencing things that people were fighting for in '65. So.
Okay, so what do you think that? So what do you think that the Catholic Church's stance should be on the killing of unarmed peoples based off of color?
Well, I think the Catholic Church should speak out against it and should be involved in offering resources in our communities to help people to address what is happening. That's what I think. Anybody else want to share a thought about it?
Thank you.
What do you think? What do you think, sir? Yeah, what do you think the Catholic Church should do?
Spot. Okay. I should always know that before I ask the question.
And I'm watching our time too, you all. Sorry about that. Yeah, okay. We've got about 5 minutes.
The Catholic Church should do.
So what do you think?
I fight the Catholic Church is conservative. I know. I don't know what to say. Okay, so
That's okay. If you want to pass it on, you can. But that's something, you know, you need to start thinking.
thank you,
What
and
do
I
you
thank
think?
you for raising the question. Thank you. I would definitely think about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Moore. Well, I will ask
Hi.
a question that I think that I've been asking myself, and that is, how do we bring in the Africans who are here? How do we begin to educate the Africans who were not involved in the civil rights movement? How do we bring them in? Because most Africans I've spoken to have spoken of rejection from African Americans. So how do we begin to bring that power into the equation? Because the number in the Catholic Church and in this country is big. And we need that number to make some noise about what's going on. So how do we bring in our African brothers and sisters who want to participate but somehow feel that they should be on the sideline?
Is that, excuse me, is that David?
It is, yes, it is. It's your student,
Okay,
yes.
because I was thinking, my student from Xavier.
Yes.
Yes, hello, it's nice to see you.
Thank you.
David, I think that's a really great point. And because when we look at the Black Catholic population in the United States today, that where we are growing is through immigration from various African countries and Caribbean, and that is where the youth is. And so I think that I feel like it's kind of a different topic, but it definitely relates to rebuilding the bridge for today. That African Catholics now here that are part of the United States now, that we have to, that's another bridge that has to be built between people who are Black Americans and the new African Americans. There is a lot of misunderstanding. We don't know each other's histories and each other's experiences. And just because we all look alike doesn't mean that we know each other. And so that's part of rebuilding the bridge is again, it's part of the growing diversity. And I think you're right, because I know at least on the campus where I teach here at the University of Dayton, a lot of the younger students who are Black are also they're first generation Americans. Their parents are from various African nations. And so these are kids who I've seen, at least here at the University of Dayton, who have gotten out there to address the recent crisis. They've been involved with the African American students. So it may be that it might be those of us who are older who need to spend more time getting to know each other and working together.
Cecilia, I'm just aware of our, Professor Cecilia, I'm just aware of our time, and I'm just curious, for the sake of our web audience, maybe we can conclude the class now. Or do you have time for one more question with one of our students?
I wish I could, but I can't. I'm sorry.
Well, we will be back. We will be back in 2 weeks on February 28th.
Yes.
The same time, 9:30 to 11:30 on the Pacific Coast, 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. on the East Coast, and everybody else who's watching on the web can figure out their time zone. Thank you so much, and we look forward. You need to wrap it up, don't you?
Well, I just want to say that next time we gather, we'll have some students from my U.S. Catholic Experience class, and for one of our class members was concerned that there was not diversity. Well, you'll see another type of diversity, because I don't have a single African American student in my history class. So they will all be present. So we'll have that diversity that you are seeking next time. So thank you all very much.